Hi, everyone. Today we have an amazing guest with us. So we're concluding our month of October on breast cancer awareness with a special guest, Toral Shah. She's a nutritional scientist and a functional medicine practitioner, and also the founder of the Urban Kitchen. And she specializes in nutritional science. She's based in London in the UK, and we are super excited to have her today on our show, Dr. the podcast. Welcome, Toral.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, welcome, Tora. We'd like to discuss about the modifiable and non-modifiable risk to get breast cancer, because I think there's a lot of kind of unknown around this. And so to kind of open up the conversation, I'd like to read off like a research from the American Cancer Society in 2019, where they say that about 5 to 10% of breast cancer cases are thought to be hereditary, which means that they are a result from gene changes, mutation, passed on from parents. So usually there's this common misunderstanding between, okay, what's the difference between hereditary versus predisposition of breast cancer?
I think that's such a great question. And I'm going to explain that with kind of go through a case study. This case study is actually my family. So just to really clarify, hereditary breast cancer is one where there's a particular gene mutation. So things like BRCA1 or 2, CHEK2, TP53, HALB2, and these are the common mutations in breast cancer, and there could be one mutation that can just cause breast cancer, and that means often more than one person in the family will have breast cancer, and at a younger age, often, not always, but often. With 80% other cases, it's completely unrelated to your family, and it's kind of random. You know, our body is making new cells every day and copying the DNA in our bodies over and over again, like millions of times a day. So it's natural that there would be kind of mistakes or things that can change, and that can cause normal mutations, DNA damage, and that can cause not just breast cancer, but any type of cancer. And in between, there's these people in the middle who've got some sort of familial link, but not got any of the genes that we know about, but they have a family predisposition. And that's different from the modifiable risk, but this is about, you know, family predisposition. And I'm going to talk about my own family because I think it's a great description of what familial kind of breast cancer looks like. So in our case, none of us have got any of these gene mutations, but my mum's sister, myself, and then about 10 of my mom's cousins have had breast cancer. Wow. We've all had the same type of breast cancer, ductal carcinoma in the right breast. And what's also interesting is that nearly everyone has moved, apart from me, who was born in the UK, everyone's moved from in Kenya or India or wherever they were born to the UK, US, Canada. So there's that part too. But anyway, in this instance, we don't have these, but we're all predisposed, you know, we have a predisposition to breast cancer, and we don't know how our genes are interacting with the environment, but something in there, and it's probably many different things, is predisposing us to breast cancer. And one of the things that I've considered is vitamin D. We know that vitamin D deficiency is linked to increase in risk of breast cancer. So obviously, if you're genetically born to live in a country where there's more sunshine and more likely to have vitamin D, right, because of darker skin, then obviously when you come to the UK or US or Canada, there's less. And like already from now in the UK until the end of March, we're not making, it's a beautiful sunny day in London, but we're not making vitamin D, and we have higher requirements. So that's one part of it. And the second part, there's a lot of other family things. We don't have our food and our lifestyles and all of those things are interacting with the environment, but something's happening where we're just more likely to have breast cancer.
Would you mind to give a bit more details about the link between vitamin D and breast cancer? Because as a person of color, and especially darker for a brown girl, I guess that vitamin D has always been something that's like, be careful, you have to take your supplements, etc. But I actually didn't know there was like a link between breast cancer. Would you mind like sharing more light on it?
So actually, there's a link between vitamin D deficiency and all cancers. So for a start, not just breast cancer. Okay. But in talking in the context of breast cancer, we know that people who are diagnosed often have a deficiency, whatever ethnicity they're from. And we know that this deficiency increases our risk. Why exactly? There's so many different mechanisms and thought processes. One is when you have lower levels, or you're more deficient or insufficient in vitamin D, your immune system's not working quite as well. And our immune system is so important for surveillance. So basically our immune system helps us to catch cancer cells before they grow out of control. So it goes around surveying all the time, like kind of close circuit television, to see if there's any cells growing out of control. And if there is, it kind of gobbles them all up. And obviously if our vitamin D levels are low, our immune system is not optimized, so it's potentially not working as well. There's definitely other mechanisms, and I have to say there's still not like a definitive answer. There's so many things we can go into, but hopefully that gives a good overview of why it's important and why we should be supplementing. And actually, we're still in a COVID period, and we also know that vitamin D deficiency can impact your COVID risk too. So just please supplement, everybody.
That's a good point. So you're saying that those, you were touching on like the non-modifiable and modifiable factors, right? So the non-modifiable would be kind of your genetics, that or genetic predisposition. Would that be?
No, your non-modifiable risks are things that you can't change. So things like you can't change your age. You are the age you are.
Oh, right.
You're more likely to have breast cancer if you're older. You can't change your gender. You're more likely to have breast cancer if you're female or have X genes rather than male, although men do get breast cancer. You're more like, if you're taller, which you can't change, it's more like
discriminatory.
I know, it is, because you've had more likely to have more growth factor. The same as if you're at a bigger birth weight, if you're just a bigger baby, again, more growth factors. What else is more like, obviously your genes, you can't do anything about that. And these are all things that you can't change. There's nothing you can do about them. It's just there. Whereas there are other aspects that we can kind of look at. But I mean, even like the other things which are non-modifiable are things of our age of menarche, which is the age that we start our periods. So if you start your periods between kind of 12 or under, you're more likely to have breast cancer. Both me and my mum started our periods at 11. But I'm not saying it's going to make you have breast cancer. Of course it's not. But it's a risk factor.
Right.
Age of menopause.
Just to touch on that, right? You were saying, so is that the link when you say if you get your period before the age of 12, you are more likely to have breast cancer because is that linked to estrogen?
Yeah, it's all linked to estrogen. And having more cycles, you're just having more cycles, so there's more chance of things going wrong. So again, the same with menopause. If you have a later menopause, you're having more cycles, the period cycle. So you're having more kind of hormones cycle, you're having more estrogen cycles. So that's why. And obviously, if you have your periods later, you've had less cycles. And same with if you have a menopause earlier, you have less cycles. So that can be part of, reducing your risk.
What would be like one key thing that you think a mom should like tell her younger daughter who's like, about to get her periods, about understanding, the estrogen part and understanding the link between having your cycle and potentially, doing those regular checks for that gene, the BRCA, for example, gene?
So you don't regularly check for the BRCA gene. Not yet. It's not something that's done unless you've got a family history. It's a genetic test and that costs money, and we don't do that, not in the UK. But one thing I would say is I think the more we talk about our bodies, the more aware we are of tracking our period cycle, like checking our breasts at least once a month, knowing what's normal, what's not normal, and what's normal for you will be different to what's normal for somebody else. And just the more we have those sorts of conversations, because for me, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more, I've had breast cancer 3 times, and all 3 times it's come from me knowing my own body so well that I can pick things up before conventional medicine and say, look, something's not right, please check this out, please check this out, please check this out. And to be really honest, all 3 times no one's believed me, and that's a whole other topic of conversation. Despite my family history, despite already having breast cancer, the second 2 times. So I think it's being your own advocate and knowing your own body. But if you don't know your own body because you never touch it, talk about it, look at it, what can you do?
Right. It's awareness. Right. Okay. Cool. Yeah, so I guess we can
now move on
to the modifiable factors.
So these are things that we can change, and I'm not saying they're necessarily easy to change, but they are things we can change. So firstly, like smoking. So smoking can increase the risk of lots of cancers, but breast cancer being one of them, particularly smoking in your teenage years, which is when a lot of women do smoke for various reasons. And I think that's something that, in your last question, what can mothers tell their daughters? Maybe that's something. Don't smoke because it can help increase your risk of breast cancer when you're like a teenager. And I have a very sad story about that. One of my really good school friends, like high school friends, we were friends from the age of 11. She also had breast cancer, and she was a dentist, so she knew about health. But she had smoked from very, very young. And I'm not saying that's the cause of her cancer, because obviously it's a multifactorial disease. But sadly, she died. It's been a while now, actually. And I keep thinking about it, and I know it's not necessarily the answer, but it's just like I keep thinking, okay, well, I'm still alive and I'm still here. She was fit and healthy in every other way. So the smoking, it does remind me, because I know she smoked from when we were very, very young, at least 13. So something to be aware of. If you're smoking when you start your periods, it can really increase your risk. What else? Alcohol consumption. So look, we all, many people drink, many people don't drink. But if you have increased alcohol consumption, that can, increase your risk of breast cancer and a few other cancers too. Obesity.
Can I interject as someone who likes the wine? And anyways, what is it about the consumption that will affect potentially your risk? Because it's one thing to say, okay, don't smoke, don't drink, but what is it exactly about that is going to put you at risk?
Great question. So when we drink alcohol, it's metabolized by our body, but it can be metabolized to something that is a carcinogen, which it can increase our risk of breast cancer. And this particularly works in our breast tissue, anywhere where there's like estrogen, things like that. So that's why drinking. I'm not saying don't drink, I drink. I think also we've got to remember the health benefits from a cardiovascular perspective, red wine and heart health. We know that there's evidence. And if you look at the blue zone literature, which is areas in the world where people live to over 100, they're all drinking. So it's about balance, right? I think it's about not binge drinking, having like at least 3 days alcohol free, keeping to the government guidelines. It's those things. And part of it is like, sometimes when people drink, they don't eat as well, and that can increase obesity, which takes us to the next risk factor. So that's why alcohol is particularly interesting, and we could really go into the mechanism, but I think it gets more complicated. But that's why it's particularly metabolized, which can be a carcinogen, particularly in breast cancer. And I think we just need to remember that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to park. And it's just that also for men, especially coming from in the UK, or not especially for men, is because I was going to say men to link to South Asian, but then in the UK, there's a very big drinking kind of culture, and giving a bit of background, I think sometimes can be helpful.
And in the UK, we are probably the unhealthiest nation in Europe, if we're even part of Europe now. And
maybe not.
A topic for another day.
I don't know, but geographically, from a geography perspective, because the way we drink is more like social binge drinking, whereas like in other countries they drink with meals and things like that. So it's about our cultural and how it's impacted our metabolic health. And actually, that's part of why our COVID. I mean, apart from our government being useless, but like the COVID outcomes being poor, because we do have poorer metabolic health compared to some of the other European countries.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay. And then you would talk about obesity, which could be a factor.
Yeah, so being overweight or obesity is an increased risk of breast cancer. It's really weird because if you're slightly overweight, when you're premenopausal, it actually reduces your risk. And that's probably because you're more likely to have less periods, because you might have PCOS or something like that, the polycystic ovary syndrome or something like that. Now, most people have breast cancer when they're postmenopausal, and being even just overweight or obese increases your risk. The reason being, there's loads of mechanisms, and I'm going to go into this in more detail in other places, but what we need to understand is that it can be a function of insulin resistance. And if our body is not metabolizing our food so well, and we're less sensitive to insulin, then we're going to store more body fat, and that and all of this is linked back to breast cancer. So for example, if you think about having diabetes, which is so prevalent in our South Asian community, having type 2 diabetes can increase your risk of breast cancer by 20%, which is really important. And there's other mechanisms that we're trying to understand with being overweight and obese, and these are the things that we're trying to get to the bottom of. Why is it so important? And can you exercise and eat your weight? Can you be a little bit overweight and still eat well and exercise well to reduce your risk for breast cancer? Because that's what we all want to know, is how do we reduce our personal risk? Because some of us are prone to being bigger, and some of us are prone to being smaller. So I think it's a really interesting area of research. And I think understanding more about this is really important, given that certainly in the UK and US UK and US, we have a really increasing risk of people being overweight or obese, and our cancer risks are increased. I mean, breast cancer has now overtaken as the most common cancer globally, in the developed world, for the first time ever. It's surpassed lung cancer, and I think that's something to remember. And yet, in the developed world, we are larger than ever before, and our eating patterns have really changed. And it's not just when we eat, but what we eat, all of these things put together. I think that's something.
I'm just curious, like as you were saying, insulin resistance, the first thing that kind of popped into my mind is also like inflammation and gut health. And can you talk a bit more about that and link to breast cancer?
Yeah, so again, I hadn't got to inflammation, but what we also know is that when you have carrying more fat cells, you're more likely to have inflammation throughout the body, and chronic inflammation can lead to more DNA damage, which can lead, increase the rate of cancers. And there's like 13 different cancers where obesity and being overweight can increase the risk, and breast cancer being one of them. So I think this is the interesting part, because if doctors and oncologists are saying, oh, what you eat doesn't matter, yet we know that what you eat changes how your insulin resistance and how your body responds to food. Number two, by eating ultra processed, sugary, high carb foods, we know that can also lead to chronic inflammation, especially in conjunction with our westernized, busy modern lifestyle. That can be part of it. And then secondly, if we're all eating fewer fruit and vegetables, plant-based foods like legumes, beans, nuts, seeds, that's affecting our gut microbiome. Now, our gut microbiome is the beneficial bacteria in our bodies, and we really need those. They perform so many roles that our bodies can't perform themselves. So, for example, they make vitamins like vitamin K. Our body can't do that by itself. It's a massive part of the immune system. So we talked a little bit about vitamin D and the immune surveillance. If your immune system isn't optimized because your gut health isn't working, is not optimized, then that's going to impact your immune system, which is all going to impact like how your surveillance habit of cancer cells or other pathogens as well, whatever they might be, viruses or, whatever. So I think this is where actually diet and nutrition become so interesting. And I don't want to overstep when we were going back to obesity and being overweight. So this is how some of the mechanisms, and there's going to be a lot more mechanisms, we're still all kind of doing more research into this, is how being overweight and obese can increase your risk of having breast cancer. And there's a lot more on the World Cancer Research Fund website. If anyone really wants to delve deep into the science, they've got the whole report, which explains all the mechanisms that we know so far.
Yeah. So is it a fair assumption to say that, say you are naturally bigger because of hereditary factors, meaning like it's kind of like the structure of the family, it's in your DNA, etc. That could be kind of an added factor of you being predisposed for breast cancer?
So what's interesting with being overweight and obese is what we think of hereditary can be kind of split into two. One is lifestyle. Like everybody, if you're eating the same way as everyone in your family, you're likely to all be the same, whether it's you're exercising or not exercising, if you're all eating healthily or not. So that's the familial part, and that could be. And then there's also like, we all have gene mutations, and we have a lot of things called single nucleotide polymorphisms, which have tiny gene mutations. So some people might have a mutation, something called FTO, which is to do with fat metabolism, and if you are, then you're more likely to be bigger. And it's really interesting. And there's other gene mutations which can predispose you to having diabetes or to being overweight. So I think there's so many elements. Plus there's an environment. But it's also in London. I mean, we have a living environment where some people pass as many between work and home, or work home and school. They can pass up to 150 fast food outlets. So that environment,
that's crazy.
And that's the poorer areas often which have these places. So the socioeconomic, it's not always your fault. In fact, they say that very little, about less than 30% of it being overweight, obese is really in your control. A lot of it's out of your control, socioeconomic factors, all sorts of other different things. So it's really hard. I remember when the shops were shut on a Saturday evening at 6 and nothing opened on Sunday, apart from like maybe the corner shop, and then open on Monday morning. Now you can be sitting on your sofa and your food comes to your house or to the door. Like literally get an Uber Eats, delivery, just literally. And I've never had takeaways, and this is the first time in my life in lockdown that I've had takeaways like that, because obviously all the restaurants are shut, so you couldn't go out. And if you didn't want to cook, then it was required to go out, which is a different experience. So I think it's not easy. We have to take away the blame. We have to look at how we can, as governmental or health organizations, what are we doing about preventative health?
Right. And even in nutrition and the options that you have now, say, because we were having this discussion, it's like for you to be vegetarian, or say you want to adopt a certain diet, a healthy diet, buying, organic stuff, say, you want to shop consciously. It's very expensive.
Yeah.
And so somebody who is a bit in a modest, from a modest background, will not be able to afford these, unprocessed or refined foods that are slightly more expensive. So I think that, it's definitely harder. And with all the temptation of having, those fast food, not only delivery, but also, just being it at low price. I mean, that's a no-brainer.
Yeah, like McDonald's is like £1 or something. I can't remember, but like I think we have to remember it's also really about to do with socioeconomic, and you can eat healthily for a cheap when you can afford to bulk buy, or there's a local fruit and veg market, which, you know, like the local market, like Croydon has a local market. Southern, we have a local market where they sell big bowls of fruit and vegetables and stuff like that. But then you have to go there. You have to have the cooking skills. You have to have the money to be able to cook. You have to have the gas and electricity or whatever it is. You have to have the pots and pans. You've got to be able to, you might need to have a freezer to batch cook, to freeze things. So all of these things are socioeconomic.
And let's not forget like the knowledge of it, like the gap. If you're already in that condition, the environment, you're going to be missing that, how to do that. So even if you have all the tools, like how are you going to bridge that gap? Who's going to help you get there, right? So it's such a intertwined system that it feels very like you're really like walking up an uphill battle, right? So you really have to have all of them in place at the right amount of, in the right time. And I guess when you're saying all of this, my question to you, or like that comes up to my mind, is like, can these factors of like these lifestyle changes affect our DNA? Like, can they change our DNA?
So there's something called epigenetics, where genes get switched on and off in response to our diet, lifestyle, and environment. So genes get switched on and off all the time. And when genes are switched on and off, that means they can reduce your risk of certain diseases or cancers or whatever it might be. So, and there are lots of foods which are known to be kind of adaptogens, things which can switch our genes on and off. So things like some of these amazing mushrooms like reishi and shiitake and maitake, or things like green tea, or the polyphenols in berries, turmeric, you know, there's loads of compounds that we know can help switch our genes on and off. So how we eat can quite literally change, not our DNA, but it can affect which genes are expressed and which genes are switched on or which genes are switched off.
So we talked about food, how it could affect. What about exercise?
So just going back to the food, one of the things that we know modifiable risk is if we eat a diet that's really high in non-starchy fruits and vegetables, that can reduce our risk. Having a diet high in calcium, reduce our risk. Having a diet that's kind of rich in fiber can help reduce our risk. So all of these things are important. Plus, one of the things that we're starting to learn about is maybe having a lower glycemic index diet, which means the food that you eat doesn't release insulin, glucose or insulin quite as quickly. And so that's where that link between the insulin resistance comes in. So I wanted to just kind of round that part up.
Yeah, sure. Would you have examples of that? For example, like a typical...
So like if you're having, when you think about foods, let's say you're having carbohydrates, you're having the most unprocessed version. So you're having whole grain brown bread as opposed to white bread, you know, those sorts of things. Same with pasta, so like wild, you know, brown rice as opposed to white rice. So those are the kind of, you know, things. And obviously then having a lot of fruit and vegetables is just beneficial in every way. And like having anti-inflammatory diet, I mean, that's the thing where people keep saying, oh, does that work? I'm like, well, if you look at the mechanisms of it, well, yes, because we know that reducing inflammation can help reduce DNA damage, which can help reduce our risk of cancer. So things like that.
That's a really good point. No, sorry. Yeah, that's a really good point, because it makes me think about like the keto diet and like, you know, going fully vegan, like, you know, at a drop of a hat. Like, I don't think it's necessarily like the best way to do that, but more maybe like taking steps, I guess, to close, like bridge that gap and then improve your vegetables and fruits, I guess.
It's having a diet from more of a diversity, and that improves our gut microbiome. And we need to be eating 30 different plant-based foods a week, and we're not. There's some people
30.
30, but they vegetables, fruits, herbs, nuts, seeds, you know, salads, even things like spices and stuff. So we need to be really doing that. A lot of people only have like between 8 to 10, and I think that's where we need to change things. You know, we're reliant on 4 main crops in the world, so we have to start diversifying our diets, and that will help to improve our gut microbiomes, help to support our immune system, and it'll help with making sure we're getting all the nutrients we need to reduce our risk of lots of disease, not just cancer.
In terms of like physical activity or exercise, is there a link there with breast cancer?
So what we know that for premenopausal women, doing vigorous exercise can help reduce your risk. And when I say vigorous, I mean being like super out of breath. So like running, singles, tennis, heavy yard work, heavy housework, you know, all of those things that get you really out of breath, lifting really heavy weights, all of that stuff. And for postmenopausal, it's moderate and vigorous. So everyone's like, oh, but I walk. I'm like, no, that doesn't do anything. So we need to be, unless you're walking up a hill fast, kind of no. So I think this is where we really need to, and particularly in our South Asian community, we exercise so little as women, and that having those role models, and I'm really lucky because my mom is a full-on exercise and a very active person who, you know, made me play a lot of sports. I was not very sporty, but I was active. And so I think this is where people need to understand, and there's so many women are so concerned with weight loss and fat loss. They don't forget, like, exercise is not for that. Exercise is for a billion other reasons. It's for your metabolic health, your heart health, for your reducing your cancer risk, for your mental health, for you to feel good. There's endorphin rush, all of those things. And you need to be doing things that you enjoy, but you also need to incorporate certain aspects. So mobility, flexibility, that is resistance training. And that is really important. And that takes us back to, what is resistance training? Using some sort of weight, and it could be body weight, to do things that can increase your muscle mass and break your kind of muscle fibers and help you build more muscle. So even things like climbing and, you know, other things that kind of where you're using your body weight, pole dancing, I don't know, whatever, you know, all of these things could help you.
Yes.
Exactly,
Yeah.
that's great. But partly because muscle is an amazing way of using up extra glucose and to help with your insulin sensitivity. The more muscle you have, the more insulin sensitive you have. So it's a sensitivity you have. So this is why it's so important. I think it's something that people don't talk about enough. And when I think about my own self, I had breast cancer at 29, and I did have recurrence, but not till I was in my 40s. And my body started to change, and, you know, all the usual things. But I was I was exercising vigorously all the time before that. And when I say vigorous, like, I mean an hour or more a day of being quite out of breath. And that's important. And whether it was a spin class and I like classes, but or tennis or dancing or lifting weights or whatever it might be. I did triathlons in the past. You know, all of those things, swimming fast, you know, all of those things are really important. You need to have variety, but you also need to be able to enjoy it. So that you keep stick to it, because the exercise you do is what works. The exercise that you think you want to do doesn't work.
Right. And I think that for touching on the BAM community, where looking back, it's like, oh, you know, you're a girl, you shouldn't be doing too much of, like, you know,
Weights.
exercise or weights, because it might, you know, I don't know what, I don't really know what was
it's a sign
the
of
thought process
masculinity.
behind.
I think they think of it as
Yeah, I don't know.
masculine.
But actually, weights if you lift weights, it makes you leaner. At the moment, I'm not doing really that much of a diet. I'm kind of just eating, which I know I need to rein in a bit, because, like, I need to be really careful with my diet. But just by being very consistent on weight training every other day, my body shape's changed in 2 months, and I've lost body fat. So, and I'm not looking bigger, I'm looking smaller. So, you know, I think these are all myths again, you know, and like for you, and I think Paula Bell writes about this beautifully, but if you want to put on muscle as a woman, we have low testosterone levels. So unless you're having testosterone, you know, as a supplement, you're not going to be bulky for a start. And you really need to be consistent for a long period of time, a few years, plus eat the right amount of protein, the right amount of calories, to really bulk up. It's not as easy as you think. I mean, it's easy to want body fat, but not really to bulk up with muscle.
Right.
I think there's like the stigma with like the South Asian community where like women, I mean, I think definitely with the older generation, maybe not so much with the younger generation, but like the embarrassment or the shy factor of like having to work out and wear workout clothes. There's a strange like association with that, which I come to see in my family as well. And I guess it's a knowledge gap, right? Too.
But it's also, you know, how many brands make modest fitness wear? And there are brands now, but they really need to think about it, because some of the bigger brands are not doing it. But if you have a little slit at the back of your neck, that's not going to be modest then, and people aren't going to wear it. People like to, you know, wear hijab or cover up. And like, I think we haven't been catered for. You know, it's only now that we've got like these modest swimming suits that Nike have brought out, whoever's brought, you know. So if we're not, and like, you know, in countries like France, they've banned kind of these things. It's just crazy, like bikinis and stuff. So I think it's not easy.
Yeah, that's very true. So exercise, and another aspect that I heard you say with regards to even like kind of byproducts of exercise is mental health. Can you touch upon that?
So one of the really interesting things, like particularly when we resistance train or do that kind of training, is that our muscles release something called brain-derived neurotropic factor, and it basically goes into our brain and kind of hoovers up all the crap, essentially. And like and that can help our brain health. And then from a mental health perspective, you know, it releases a lot of endorphins and feel-good molecules, you know, neurotransmitters, which make us feel better. And I went to a spin class today, and I give you this example openly. Literally cried. So I was so upset about something that happened. I was talking to one of my best male friends who's South Asian, and I was telling him blah, blah, blah. And I went in and I was so upset, and I came out feeling like, woohoo, life is okay. it is okay. So I think we underestimate how important exercise is, and it has to be the right type of exercise for you. Like it might be just dancing around your living room, it may be, I don't know, cycling, it might be rowing, it might be like going for a really long run with your dog, I don't know, but you have to find the right thing for you. But I think that exercising for aesthetics is really going to be not keep you motivated. Exercising for all the health benefits will keep you motivated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then after, some people don't really care about, you know, having that motivation of like saying health benefits, because like one of the things is that, well, at the end of the day, because I have some of the aunties that do tell me who are like, well, we're all going to die at some point. And it's like, what is the point? But anyways, these are just a bit more, how to say,
skeptical.
Listen, I'm with you. My mom is with you. My mom's 72 and she's a crazy exerciser. And she says, I'm just tired of telling all these ladies that they need to exercise. And she's constantly like, she goes, why don't they understand? I'm like, I don't know. So I think you're in the, I think there is that frustration from all of us who don't, and then when people complain or say it's their karma or their fate or whatever, I just feel like,
oh no.
I'm like, yeah, I just sort of like, yeah, no, this is not the conversation. And people have to take responsibility for their own, but we also have to make it easy and encourage people to have the socioeconomic and the structural things in place to make it easy. And exercise needs to be fun and it needs to be inclusive. And if it's not inclusive, it's not going to encourage people. So if people have had bad experience, which is so many people have, particularly women of color, then they're not going to want to, and then you can't blame them. But then you're like, so then you sort of think, okay, well, can we do more like bhangra parties or garba or whatever it might be that they might actually enjoy, which gets them moving. Yeah, maybe we do
that. And so when you say exercise, right, like, can you kind of share what the impact is on reducing your risk of breast cancer by doing it?
So we just know it reduces your risk by being vigorously active in premenopausally and being moderate to vigorous active post-menopause. It can reduce your risk. What the mechanisms are, again, it's for all these different things, changing insulin resistance, not just changing your weight, but there's so many metabolic health aspects of exercise, and all of these things fit in. And do we understand all of them? Not yet, probably, but again, it's to understand that it changes our metabolic health, it changes how our body works. What we do know is that exercise releases many kind of immune system molecules that can help optimize our immune system. So if our immune system's working better, again, as I shared before, it can go along and gobble up any sort of pre-cancerous cells or any cells that are starting to grab control. So these are the different ways in which exercise can support reduction of not just breast cancer, but other cancers too.
Right. And I guess to touch on, like, I guess with people who go through breast cancer, or if they're going through kind of treatments, chemotherapy or radiation, and even as people who go through like surgery, right? Are there things that they can do in that process to support that experience that they are going through?
So firstly, pre-surgery, rehabilitating yourself and really getting yourself as fit as possible is actually going to really help you to recover from any type of surgery, whether it's for breast cancer or any surgery, heart disease, whatever it is. And I think that pre-rehabilitation is something that we're really starting to look at in the research kind of world with cancer. It's like, can we help people in that 5 to 6 weeks between diagnosis and starting surgery or treatment or whatever? Because with the stronger we can get them, the more likely they are to kind of get through it and to reduce side effects. What we do know is that for those having chemotherapy and radiotherapy, if the exercise before their treatment is given, it can help reduce side effects. Again, I don't know the exact mechanisms yet, but in Australia, they're prescribing exercise before each chemotherapy and radiotherapy session.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right before.
Right before, a couple of hours before. So, I mean, how it works, we still need to understand, it's to do with increased blood flow, which means that, there's more blood going around your system, so it can take away any damaged cells. It could, because it increases your breath rate, your oxygenation, all of those things. I'm sure there's plenty of other things that an exercise physiologist could tell you more about. But for me personally, when I had radiotherapy this year, I've got a spin bike behind me and I'm actually leaning on it. But I just made sure went on the bike before I went to every single radiotherapy session. And I'm not saying I didn't have side effects, I was tired, but it did help me to get through. And I didn't want to necessarily exercise in those days. Some of the days I felt more tired, but once I started, I was okay. And I think in the past, in all countries, they kind of told you to rest and eat what you wanted and just everyone's going to lose weight. It's not like that. Most people have cancer now, overweight or obese. Very few people, some people do, don't get me wrong, would throw up a lot in chemotherapy, but these days people they've got really good antiemetics to stop you throwing up with chemotherapy. So people don't necessarily lose weight. It's really a good thing if people can keep moving and sort of supporting them, so having the sense of control over something.
I have have a more kind of personal question with regards to your experience with, 3 times going to radiotherapy, I guess, if that's
No,
correct.
this is the first
Okay.
time I've had radiotherapy. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, so they can't really radiate an area. It's not really helpful if they've radiated it before. So I've never had radiotherapy. I've had a very slow growing non-aggressive breast cancer called, the first was something called ductal carcinoma in situ, which means it was trapped in the milk ducts, did not spread outside of that. But it was all over my breast. I had a mastectomy and hormone treatment. The second time it was a tiny tumor, I think 9 millimeters or something. And it was in the skin of the mastectomy, because I had something called a skin sparing mastectomy, where they kept the skin and they kind of scraped out all of the breast tissue, and I had an implant. And then they could just remove that tumor. And then they talked a lot about radiation, but they just couldn't decide whether it was the right thing. Because one of the things about having radiotherapy as a younger person is that, especially depending on where your exact tumor is, it can affect your heart and damage your heart and lungs. So they have to be really careful. And it also can increase the risk of other cancers, like, so they have to be quite careful. So I've only had radiotherapy this time. I haven't had chemotherapy either. So I think we have to remember that everyone's treatment's different. I have had a non-aggressive, it's never been in my lymph nodes or spread anywhere, so it's been quite localized, and so my treatment's been very localized. But I do have hormone treatment, which is a more systemic treatment, which goes around your body, and it's to block estrogen receptors in my body, because I have a very estrogen positive breast cancer.
Okay. And might sound very cold-hearted, but does it, at some point, does the C word to cancer become normal? So you come from a family where, there are risks, you're aware, you're well equipped, you're knowledgeable about it. Does the mental hurdle that comes with it, do you feel that does it ever reduces?
No, the shock each time. Even though I think what's helped is working in the field. That's helped, because the more I learn, the more I feel in control, the more I think I can do. The actual experience, like if you told me the first time I'd have it 2 more times, I'd have been like, no, I'm done. Bye. I'm off. Just take me to Dignitas. I'm done. I can't be doing this again. But in practice, you do it again, and it is the way it is. And I think from a philosophical point of view, I'm like, great, I'm getting to learn stuff that I'll be able to use to help my research, my patients, and anything else I do. So from that perspective, I feel not privileged, but it is a part of a journey, and I'm learning more. That doesn't mean that I don't get really upset and cry. And I did have a bit of a cry last night, and I was thinking, this is not fair, why me, which you do. And I'm sure, I don't think you can really stop feeling the impact of it. It's almost actually aggregated, and it's almost worse each time, because you know what it's like. And you also realize that most people don't understand, particularly when you're younger, what it feels like. By the time you get a little bit older, most people have had somebody in their families or lives or friends who've had, some sort of cancer, if not breast cancer. But especially when I was diagnosed, none of my friends got it, in their 20s and 30s. No one really understood, and it was like, what? So no, it doesn't. From a personal perspective, no. Working in the field is a whole different ball game, and that doesn't anesthetize you against it, but it does make you have more reasoning with it.
Right.
Right. And I mean, just to, I guess, to echo or come from there at that point, are there things that in that journey, right, that have really personally helped you in kind of navigating the experience? I mean, that's not besides the lifestyle choices and the food and nutrition aspect of things and exercise.
Yes, absolutely. I think, the first time it took me down a real journey of personal development, and that kind of brought me to more of an integrative approach, and understanding kind of how our psychological, mental, emotional health impacts our physiological health. And I think that has been really important. I think the last 2 times I've had breath work, meditation, and a whole lot of other complementary and integrative approaches, which I didn't have the first time. I didn't have in my toolbox. And I think that's really helped, understanding how diet can change. I knew diet could, and I could understand the scientific mechanisms, but how kind of it can affect your epigenetics and your healing, and also just having some more spiritual, holistic kind of tools. So knowing that there's different practices like qigong or yoga or whatever, or chakra, meditations or stuff that kind of moves things energetically. I cannot explain the science. I have no idea, but they are things that have helped me to feel better. And I think having a really, really, really good psychotherapist who specializes in cancer has made the world of difference, helping me to understand how I interact with the cancer experience, but also how I interact with people and how they treat me, and how, what's been going on. So all of these different things. And I'm also really open to things like, I love sound baths. I love, my best friend's a yoga teacher. So I think the Ayurvedic, when I had breast cancer in the second time, I went, as soon as I was allowed to, I went to an Ayurvedic health farm, which was brilliant, and naturopathic health farm, which was brilliant. And it helped to kind of revitalize me and to kind of get me back in sync almost, and kind of, I hate to use the word detox because that wasn't what I did. It was more just to balance me again, kind of give me a space to rest and time, because in the UK, it's quite hard to just rest, especially if you live alone. So going to somewhere like that where there's sunshine, it's in India, they're making all your food, they're doing everything for you. All you have to do is relax and enjoy. It's great. Massage, all of these things. I think they all can have their moments and they can all help. And I think we mustn't knock them because I think it's so important. It's such an important part of the healing process. And then, and some things are going to work for some people and some things aren't. And that's just the way it is.
Yeah. I think you highlighted a really crucial and like essential part of like anybody's healing journey in any type of illness, right? And for them to like be open to the fact that it's not just like these factors. You can't be in control of all the factors, and there's some things where you just have to kind of have the faith to be open to listen and like receive information, right? I think that's a great insight that you can share with our audience and anyone listening, really. I don't know if there's like any.
Well, for me, on that note, I think we can conclude our episode with our rapid fire questions. So the first one is, what is the worst health advice you've ever received in your life?
Such a hard one, because I thought about this. I think be positive, because it's so annoying, because it's not always helpful, and sometimes it can be toxic positivity. And if you understand what I'm going through, don't tell me to be positive, because you have no idea. You have no idea what it is to go through what I'm going through. So I'm going to say that.
That's a good one. And if there was one habit that you would say that we should all adopt, what would that be?
Eat the rainbow. Eat the rainbow of massive diversity of fruit, vegetables, and plant-based foods every day, and like really use the colors of the rainbow to pick different things each day, and you will definitely change your health.
I like the how to memorize it. Just eat the rainbow. And the last one is, if you were to put a soundtrack to your life, what would it be?
That was a really hard one, but I think one of my favorite songs, I'd rather share that, as Walking on Sunshine with Katrina and the Waves. It's a really classic old song, but I think it just makes me feel joyful, and it's been a difficult year for everybody, 2 years for everybody, and it's a joyful, happy song. And I think sometimes we have to make the choice to be happy. And I was listening to another podcast by Mo Gaudat, who writes beautifully about happiness. Happiness is a choice sometimes, and we need to choose to be happy. So sometimes listening to these songs and things that make us laugh and joyful, they're going to have such an impact on our health. They're going to make us healthy and more positive and happy. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, cool.
100% agreed. Well, thank you so much, Toral.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I'd just like to say, I want to dedicate this particular episode to a dear friend of mine, Shazia, who sadly passed away from secondary breast cancer today. And in her honor, she had the most amazing grace and graciousness and acceptance of her cancer. And for that reason, I think it's great to dedicate this episode to her.
What a beautiful way to end our episode, and also the Breast Cancer Awareness Month. So again, thank you so much, Toral.
Thank you.